Hello everyone, my name's Daniel Halls. I'm the Power Platform Consulting Lead at FSP. My video today is to show you how to create dynamic questions in a Canvas app. The idea here is that you can create a solution where the end users or the customers have control over the wording of questions that are being asked of people without the need to update and change either the data source behind the scenes or to physically go in and update the Canvas app itself. So before we get into that, before we start talking about the process to do that, if you like the video, please give us a like. If you want to see more of what I'm producing, then subscribe to the channel. And if you get any questions, please ask them in the comments below. I will do my best to answer those. And who knows, some of your questions might end up being future videos. So what I've done, I've set up a framework of an application that we're going to have a quick look at. So some very simple bits and pieces are in place already. Give you a quick tour of those before we start our build. So I've done home screen with a navigation that pops out, takes us down to the new screen. So you can see there's nothing really in the app at the moment. There will be a settings screen that we can have a look at and put some bits and pieces. This will be the screen where they add and remove their questions. There's also an in-app settings screen that defines all of our color and sizing. So it's nothing too fancy, just fairly rudimental, component that just defines our colors and themes so that they are set in the rest of the app itself. So that's what we've got in place at the moment. I've also hooked up to a data source. So I've got my questions list behind the scenes, which is where we're going to store the questions. I'm not actually going to worry about storing the answers today anywhere or sending them back to a data source. Obviously, you can do that. All we're going to do today is show you how you sort of collect those up within the app itself. And then maybe in a future session, we can probably talk about how we might patch those back to SharePoint or use a form to submit or whatever it might be. But today, we're just going to focus on getting the questions fluent in the app. Other thing to note as well, just to jump across, I am building it as a responsive app, so it does fit to full screen. So I will have to do a few bits and pieces with positioning and sizing as we go along. Okay, so first things first, I'm going to go into my new screen. This is where we're going to start asking the questions. I'm going to start with some real basics. I'm going to put a label on the page, and we're going to take our label and we're going to add some text. Now I'm going to do this just as a bit of a survey. So we're going to ask one question, and then there's going to be some possible answers underneath that they can say yes or no to. Just a really simple example. So I'm going to say, are you allergic to any of the following? And that will do as my question. Being responsive, I'm going to need to position this on the page. I'm going to want this to sit under my header somewhere in the middle. So the first things first, I'm going to do position. So we're going to say this is going to sit underneath my header component. Actually, it's going to start. I'm going to just put it at 0. I'm going to do it the simple way. And we're going to say this is going to be underneath my header component. What screen am I on? Header component 2. So I'm going to do some quick whizzing over some parts of the build today, just so I can focus on the question. The questions part, and I'm going to do app.width to make it fit the width, and we'll make it centered. And we've just very quickly pinned that to the middle, to the top of our screen. We can do lots of stuff with height as well if we want, but we're just going to leave it at 40 for now. That will do us. And what that will do basically is that will set this to sit underneath our header, no matter what the screen size or the position. It will stay fixed to where it is now. So that's that. We're going to then put in a gallery. That's going to be our next step. So what we're going to do is I'm going to start with just a blank gallery. Vertical, horizontal, doesn't matter. This is how I'm going to design my questions. And I'm going to connect that to my questions list. And there we go. And I'm going to insert a text label. And what you'll see is that I've got fish, wheat. I'll just resize that for a second. You'll see I've got dairy. Are you allergic to any of the following? So fairly simple. So whilst let me just do some positioning on this on the screen. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to take my gallery. I'm going to position it so it's always going to sit at 0, but we're going to put it underneath our header dot. So we start at the Y position and add, like I say, I'm not really focused on responsive design at the moment. Maybe I'll do a session on that another day, but that positions that under there. The width of this will be the width of the app. Width, type correctly. There we go. And then the height of that is going to be app height minus header number 2. Let's just focus on getting that right, shall we? There we go. Minus height. There we go. Position it so it fits the screen. So that's going to fit the whole of the screen, so that if in the future they add hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of things that you could possibly be allergic to, you'd have a nice scrolling gallery of the different headers in there. I also like to remove padding. That's just me. The wrap count's going to stay at 1 because we just want 1 row per question. I'm going to position this inside my gallery at 0 and 0, so it'll always be at the top. There we go, and we can set the height of this. Now again, we could do this dynamically if we want to, but we're not. We're going to just set a base 40 for that, because that will do us for what we're trying to show today. So that's our 3 questions. And actually what we could do if we really wanted to, we could actually push those into a sort of a nicer position. They don't take up much room. Let's actually push that in the center of our screen, he says. This is where I overthink design. I should just chuck it on the page just to show you how it works, but now I'm going to have to figure out how I position this nicely. So I'm actually going to put this in the center. So I'm going to say parent, not width, not x, parent width divided by 2 minus self.width. There we go. I think that's going to be about right for what I'm going to try and show, because I'm going to put a toggle beside it, like so. So there's our 3 things here. So we're also now going to insert toggle into our gallery. So we've got some offs. There we go. Let's just make the toggle no and yes. Nice and simple. And let's position that in line with, and again, what we should say here is this shouldn't be label 5. This should be, no, let's not overthink this. Let's just leave it label 5 whilst we're doing our setup. Okay, where are we going to position the toggle? We're going to say dot x plus dot width, like so. That will do. Y position parent, not dot y, it's parent dot template height divided by 2 minus self dot height divided by 2. There we go. Just ignore me mumbling to myself whilst I go through that. Okay, that's fairly closely positioned to somewhere near the center of the screen. If I was doing this properly, I would come up with a nice design and where I want them actually to be. I might wrap them, I might, you know. So we've got the toggles sitting in our gallery. We can toggle them yes and no. I've just writing those to absolutely nowhere. So they're just going to give us the ability to say yes or no to each of those options. What we need to now do is we need to actually work with the, you know, every time you press the answer, we're going to need to deal with that. So what we're going to do is I'm going to work, because I'm going to want to make some decisions in the app based on that, I'm going to work with a collection in the app itself. And what I want to do is every time I press the button, I want to add the fish. Let's say it's fish, I'm pressing the button. Every time I say that, I want to put my answer into that collection. So fish, am I allergic to fish, yes or no? So I want to start with answering that question. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to insert a button. Now what we're going to do, and this is just a temporary button, just put it on the page to use it to create the collection, just purely because we want the collection we're going to use created in its data structure, so that when we go through and do the patching and the lookups and things that we're going to need to do in a moment, the structure is already there for us to use. So here's what I'm going to do. On my button here, I'm going to just do a clear collect. That's how we start defining it. Now it's clear collect because we want to just clear all the data out before we then start collecting into it. It doesn't matter really at this point. This is just to define our collection. If it's not defined, we can't reference it. So we're going to just do col So col, just to prefix the collection with col, like you prefix with var, just so I can find them easier later on. So col for collection, and I'm going to call it questions, just for simplicity's sake. So we've got col collections, and then we're going to need to define the data that we're going to put in there. So we're going to do comma, we're going to do curly braces. Now I also like to just do curly braces and close off so that we're ready. So that's sort of basically creating a very blank collection. But now we need to go between the curly braces, expand our drop down, and define our collection structure. So what we want is we want a few different fields that we're going to look up. So we're going to do, I'm going to do QID, question ID. The reason I'm going to do QID is because if you do ID and you're trying to compare ID to, say, ID in a SharePoint list, it will whinge at you and fall over because it's like comparing the same two things together. They sort of clash. So QID, just to give a differentiator. I've also done like ID1, it doesn't matter. Then we do define what that's going to be. So the first value that we're going to put in there is actually, we're just going to, again, create the data structure, put a number, just a 1. And then we're going to do a new row. So that's our ID. And then we want to know what the actual answer was. So let's do ANSWER. And the answer will invariably be a true or false value. So let's set it to false. Like so. And that will probably do us. So what will happen now is we'll press the button and this will create me a collection with 2 columns, a QID column and an answer column, and it will set the ID to 1 and the answer to false. So let's give that a whirl and press the button. Boom. What we'll see, that's still the sound effect of all buttons. We'll have a collection with the answer set as false and the QID set as 1. That was hard coded into our button. So we can just leave that out of the way for a moment. We're going to do away with that when we're done. But we just, like I say, define the structure. Now we need to start thinking about actually putting some proper information in there. So what we're going to do is we're going to work with a couple of different functions. We're mainly going to be using the patch function or the collect function. So we're going to use the collect function if there's not been an answer for fish before. And we're going to use the patch function to update one of our entries if we've already answered it before. And the reason we're going to do that is simple. If we had it so that we needed to, I don't know, we sat here and we changed our mind and we toggled fish backwards and forwards. If we just wrote that to our collection every single time, we'd have a nice long collection full of fish saying yes, no, yes, no, yes, no, yes, no. And if we wanted to then patch that back to SharePoint later on, we would then send, update after update after update back to SharePoint, or we'd have loads of records in SharePoint or whatever it might be. So what we want to do is we want to tidy that up at source. So how we're going to do that is we're going to do a bit of logic. We're going to have an if statement, we're going to have some lookups, and we're going to find the record we need to update, and then we're going to send through the update to that particular item in the collection. So what we need to do is we've got our toggle selected, and we're going to work with the on check, and we're going to start with select parent. And select parent, if you've not used it or not familiar with it, basically means when we interact with this control, we've got this item in the gallery selected, fish, ID1, or whatever the item is you're looking at. First thing it does is it makes sure that's selected, and then we go on and do what we want to do to make sure that we're updating, sending the right piece of information into our collection. Now we're going to start on our if statement. So we need to work out if there's already one of the fish records in, and we keep saying it, the fish records in our collection. And if so, we're going to update it. If not, we're going to create a new one. So we're going to say if this item.id is in col, what do I call it? Col questions.id. So is that in there at all? Okay. Oh, it's not ID. It's QID. You saw me do it. You saw me make it QID, and I forgot it was called QID. Comma. So we've done our first part. So we need the true value. So if it is in there, we need to update it, don't we? So to do the update, we're going to use the patch function.
Patch is really useful. I use it a lot. In fact, I patch to SharePoint rather than using forms and submitting because I find better control over where I send data and things like that. So we're going to patch to cold questions, but we need to know where we're going to patch. So if you look at the string, the formula for patch, you've got the source, so patch the source, which is cold questions. Then you've got what record it is, which one are you patching to, and then what is the update to it, and then it commas and repeats. So go and do the same again, record, update, record, update, record, update. So you could do loads and loads and loads if you wanted to. We're just going to update the one record. So we're going to do comma. Now we need to find the record. So to find the record, we're going to use lookup. Lookup is akin to sort of a search tool. Basically, go into the data set, have a look down the list and see if you can find one that matches these parameters. So again, the structure is source. So we're looking in cold collections, no, cold questions, cold questions. And then what we do need to do is we need to say, well, what are we looking for? So we're looking for when this item .id equals, we can now just type QID. We don't need to do cold dot because we are in the collection. We've defined that we're in the collection. So we're saying anything, this item ID is equal to QID. If that is the case, we can then go and update that particular item. So we can close that off. That's our item found. So if we look at our patch breakdown at the moment, we've done patch, the collection. We've found the record with the lookup. So if we put a comma in, it's now going to say, well, what do you want to update? And now we can just update the single column that we want to update. We just want to update the answer, don't we? We don't need to update the ID or change anything like the name of the title. We can just get into our curly braces, which is what our update's going to be. And then in the curly braces, we're going to do, I think I did answer, ANSWER. And the answer is now going to be, because we're on the toggle, remember we're writing this on the toggle, we can do self.value. Self is a really useful code. I use it all the time. Positioning, sizing, text, self.value or self.whatever. You can reference yourself as an item in Power Apps. So basically just set it to whatever my value is when I press it. So it will be true, obviously. We could, if we wanted to, we could just write true because we know it'll always be true because it's the unchecked value, but self.value means that this formula can be copied and pasted into the false, sorry, not into the false, into the uncheck, and it will work exactly the same way. We don't have to change anything. So that's the first half of our formula there. Let's close off our bracket at that point. There we go, because that's our patch. So bracket, parentheses, let's get terms right, shall we? So our patch is now set to there. So what we're saying there, so we've done our first part of our if statement. So this bit here says if this item.id is in cold questions, that's tricky to say, in cold questions.qid, then we're going to patch an update to that particular item. The way we're going to patch is we're going to patch to the collection. We're going to look up the record that we want to update using the lookup function. And then the update that we're going to make to it is just to the answer question. We don't need to change anything else about it. So we've just done change answer to whatever the value is of the toggle at the time. So that's the first half of our if statement. The other half of our if statement is if there isn't one in there. And this becomes a little bit easier because we know there's not one in there. We can just come in here and we can collect. We don't need to clear anything. We don't need to delete anything. In fact, we don't want to clear definitely because that will clear the whole record, the whole collection. Excuse me. So we're going to go collect. And we're going to collect, where are we going to collect to? So we need to put in our cold questions. That's where we're going to put it. And then we're going to open up our curly braces like so. And then we're going to say, right, we've got QID. We're going to set QID to this item.id. Please don't whinge at me, thank you, formula, comma. and we're going to set answer to, you guessed it, self.value, which is the value of the toggle, because that's what we're working with. And when we're done there, we can close off our collection and we can close off our if statement. So that closes our collection, that closes our if statement. In fact, if I was to be really picky, I would put that underneath and put that underneath, and I would outdent it and all the rest of it. But Microsoft's got this wonderful button here. So actually, I didn't have to write this all in a neat, tidy way. I can just press that button and it just straightens everything out. I wasn't far off, granted, but that's it.
Now that we've put the formula that we needed onto our on-check value, what we're going to now need to do is to do the same for the uncheck value. So obviously we're using a toggle in this particular example, so this is the change of state. So we're going to just literally select all of what we've done there and copy it to the clipboard, get rid of our dialog formula bar from the top, and go into the uncheck property here and paste that in. Now that literally is it. If I expand that, so we're now in the uncheck, and in here you can read through the formula, the same input as we had on the check value. Because we used the value of the item for the answer, so self.value, it will actually write back the value that we need. This can be done in a number of different ways. Now, if you use things like drop-down boxes, it could be self.selected.value, so it would always put whatever you choose. It could be the text value of the item. So using self is a really flexible way of just getting the information out of the current, the current control that you're working with. If you were doing this elsewhere in the solution, you would have obviously referenced the toggle itself directly. So let's say, for example, I had a separate button and I wanted to write to my collection. I could have the button say, toggle one dot value instead of self.value. So there's ways around that. But because we're working within the parameters of actually pressing the button itself, we're going to use the toggle. We're going to use the self.value. So that copies that across from there. So the way we've structured this, we should now have a way for the, when you check the toggle, it goes and has a look in the collection. It sees if we've answered this particular question before. If we have, we update it. If we haven't, we then create a new entry in the collection. So I'm going to show you that very quickly working. So if I just pop this out of the way, and the easiest way to show lots of rows of data. Now, you can check on a collection, obviously, from the menu, collection, and here's my cold questions. There's nothing in there at the moment, but it will also only show you the first 5. So it will only give you a snippet of information. If you want to see it, the easiest way to do it is actually just to insert a gallery, like so, and connect it to your collection. Now this is only temporary, this is just so I can show you. Sometimes I'll also use the galleries behind the scenes to do calculations and formulas and things, but we won't get into that today. Let's just pop a label in. I've not put that in the gallery, that was silly of me. Let's put it actually in the gallery. There we go. And the text is currently saying text. So we're just going to change that from text and we're going to make it this item dot answer. Let's just look at our answers for now. Actually, we'll show you both. Let's give you some like the ID as well, because we did put the ID in there, didn't we? So let's go ID, QID. Remember the values I put in there. It's displaying false in that one just purely because we're in the edit mode. When we go into actual preview mode, you see it will go blank. So all I want to do is just collapse that up a little bit and make it visible. Let's just fill the background in so we can see where it is. There we go. So that's our gallery, yeah? Just out of the way. So basically what should happen here now, if I answer fish, so if I press fish, you'll see that QID1 is true because I've just made it true. If I do wheat, I get number 2 and I get number 3. Now my collection should actually only ever be this big. It shouldn't grow any bigger than this because we did that lookup part. The lookup part is going to allow us to jump in there and say, oh, you've already got one with the ID number 1. So instead of writing another value to the bottom for it, we'll update that one to false. So if I now toggle fish to false, you can see it changes in my collection behind the scenes, and the same for that. So now we've got this running behind the scenes. Now there's a number of different things we could do here. We could write some rules to use this information to make decisions. So we could say, oh, you've got to say, if you say, so for example, on this one, it could be if you say yes to any of these, you get a different menu. You go to a menu that's got, non-allergy specific foods in there. You could have it that if you said yes to fish. Now I haven't stored the value fish in here, but I could also write that into my collection, and we could have a little formula that says, oh, if they say yes to fish, go to a different menu, go to the loads of logic we can then potentially write. We're not going to get into all of that today. So thank you very much for watching. This was my first YouTube video, so any feedback, tips, advice, pop them in the comments. Any questions you've got on some of the stuff we've covered today, anything that you might like me to cover in the future, pop them in the comments and I'll do my best to answer those and get videos together in the future. I've been Daniel Halls. This has been Power Platform Principles. Thank you very much for watching.